Aaron Rodgers looking for Devontae Adams. He's got it. DJ Moore has a pass to the end zone. Jonathan Taylor, touchdown. Pass is caught. Diggs, touchdown.
Hello everyone, welcome back to RotoViz Overtime on RotoViz Radio, brought to you by Blue Wire. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. My co-host, as always, is Shawn Siegele. Shawn, I'm going to give a plug at the start of today's show. I usually do it at the end of the show, but any suggestions for topics or content ideas people would like to see on the podcast over the next couple of weeks or months, send them to me either on Twitter or email them at rotovizradio@gmail.com. The other thing, we are planning out our kind of guest list for guests. We're going to try and have one guest on each week on the podcast. So anyone that has any guest suggestions they would like to see or hear, let us know them as well. But Shawn, we are going to be talking about some best ball picks from a recent draft that you did along with Blair Andrews. We're going to look at those double-digit rounds, pick out some spots that we think are interesting. So that should be a lot of fun. We teased it on the show earlier this week on Wednesday's show that we are planning to do some best ball drafts ourselves. So I'm looking forward to diving into that. We are trying to pick a time where we're going to get those drafts done. At the moment, those drafts all are at 2 a.m. Irish time. So I may be forgoing sleep to make sure that we get some good podcast draft content. And Shawn, when you're targeting that top prize, you got to put in those late nights, got to put in those hours to come in first place.
You do. And I've heard that people draft the best at 2 a.m. So it seems like you probably have an advantage. It's not like, it's not 5 or 6 in the morning. That's when, the strike squads attack your house and your residence there. If you've been up to no good, 2 a.m., you're still functioning at peak levels. In fact, I was reading recently that you really should go to bed at 10 and get up at 6, because the time period there from 10 until 2-ish, your body releases a flood of chemicals that are very rehabilitating. But if you instead stay up, then you get a second wind, and your body doesn't fix itself. But from 10 to 2, you're firing on all cylinders. It's the best for the mind there, because you've essentially hacked the system.
Is there any correlation between those chemicals and best ball draft success?
If
has that been proven?
Anytime that you're doing something to across an ocean, then you have a big advantage, because people don't know what the Irish think is the best way to attack this, and so you've got that.
But so now looking forward to those. Should be fun. Hopefully we get that done. Might even be coming out in the next week or so. So stay tuned for that. If it does happen, we will be mentioning it obviously here on the podcast, let you know about it. The easiest way to get all that if it does happen in the next week or so is those bonus shows will always drop on the RotoViz OT podcast feed. So make sure you're subscribed there. Shawn, this draft you did with Blair Andrews, you have read up on the website, basically up to round 10 so far, but a lot of people will look at round 1, round 2, round 3, see where the players are. And I often find when it gets to drafting, people will know all the players going in the first 4 or 5 rounds, but then, that's where they really let themselves down after that point, is where the players are going, where the spots are to pick those players. And I also think that the further you get and the closer you get to round 20, if you're in a 20 round draft, but if you're in a 28 round draft, the closer you get to that end spot, the more mistakes tend to be made. And, we talk a lot about roster construction, and something that I've learned a lot with drafting from you is kind of drafting in reverse and seeing what players are available at those spots. So we should see some opportunities here again this season. Interesting to see how some of these rosters are constructed at the back end of these drafts. Was there anything standing out for you in this particular draft that you did in terms of some of the decision making in the roster construction in the back end where players have gone?
Well, the first thing is that we did start with Jonathan Taylor, and that's always difficult because Blair and I want to come out and essentially take no running backs. If you ever want to do a pure 0 RB draft where you just simply don't take any, then Blair is your man. He is your partner there. So we had the 101, and you don't necessarily get that that often. So we felt like we had to go ahead and take Taylor and get that exposure. But then our second running back was drafted in round 14. So sometimes when we talk about modified zero running back, people will get frustrated and say, look, I mean, that's not what you're doing. You took a running back in the first round. You can't consider yourselves to be zero RB in any way, shape, or form. And yet, when you look at this, there aren't a whole lot of other drafters out there who are taking their second running back in round 14. We loved this draft. We did take 7 consecutive running backs there to finish. So we finished with 8 running backs total. Anyone who has ever talked with Peter Overzet knows that the later you get in the draft, the better value running back becomes related to wide receiver the whole way there. So that part of it was fun. We get the running back early, and then we go 12 consecutive picks attacking other positions. And part of that, Colin, part of the reason why it's so fun to do these early drafts is you can take some of these rookies, coming off of doing the RotoViz rookie guide and getting that content out there. It was pretty fun from round 10 to round 20 to take 6 rookies. And so that part of it, I think, also gives us an advantage because we're looking at this and we know that those guys are going to rise as we get closer to the draft. And perhaps only 4 of them rise and 2 of them fall, but those 4 risers are going to give us some picks and an overall construction that other drafters don't have a lot of exposure to. And hopefully, you can't ever guarantee this, but hopefully have a difficult time kind of matching up with once people see where these rookies go.
Yeah, and I mention this, Sean, every time we touch on this topic, but Curtis in particular has done good work up on the site around the value of the rookies increasing after the NFL draft. So I agree there with what you're saying. Some of them might drop off, but we'll probably see a couple around rise and some of those guys. So that's going to set you up well there. Obviously, we talked through some of the other picks on previous shows, but you go on a run from round 14 through round 20 here. Couldn't get enough running backs at that point. Are you baking into that some of the fact that some of those running backs may also drop off in value, or was that the plan going into hit running back as hard as that in those final rounds?
Well, we would have been very open to taking running backs in that sort of 10, 11, 12, 13 range. We did need one more quarterback to get sort of the 2 QBs in the QB window and to give us flexibility to not take a third. Now, there are some interesting guys really late. Sam Howell, for example, not drafted at all. And while there's a very good chance that he ends up drafted into a situation where he has to sit and wait for his season, there's also a good chance that he's the best quarterback in this draft. And if he does get an opportunity, that he scores a lot of points. And so for 31 QBs to go and for him not to go gives you a sense of, okay, well, you could have probably saved a pick for the 19th or 20th round and been in a situation where you selected someone who had a lot of upside. Wasn't the same type of wasted pick that some of these other guys are, because some of the picks in rounds 18 through 20 really have virtually no value at all. But we were looking at running back, and once we got the great values on the rookie wide receivers in rounds 10 through 13, we knew then that you're going to have to take a lot of volume at the running back position. And this was kind of one of the interesting things with the team that you and Blair and I did, was that we ended up with almost too much running back firepower, right? If we had been able to substitute a running back in for one of the wide receiver spots, then we would have come in ahead of Connor there. Obviously, that's kind of a silly what if, because that's just not the structure. You've got to get the other wide receiver points, and we would never have guessed that we'd be in a situation where not only did we not have a wide receiver in the flex, but we would have been sort of grateful to not have to play a second wide receiver. This team that Blair and I have done, we're looking at definitely having wide receivers and tight ends. We took the 3 good tight ends early, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are some weeks where we have a tight end, obviously in the tight end spot, but then the second and third tight ends take those 2 flex positions. And so your wide receivers, whoever the top guys are there in that circumstance, are going to have scored a ton of points. But then we have these 7 late running backs. Obviously, this is a team built to where, Jonathan Taylor needs to stay healthy. It's not built with sort of contingencies in place for him to get hurt. But you look at these guys that we selected, and we took Jerick McKinnon in round 14. I thought this was interesting that he gets to this spot, because there are some guys drafted ahead of him like Chuba Hubbard, Sony Michel, Trey Sermon, Gus Edwards, Kyron Williams. All of those guys, I think, are in a little bit worse of a situation. Darrell Williams was taken several rounds ahead. Now, McKinnon is a free agent, and it's very possible that he doesn't re-sign with the Chiefs. But the Chiefs are in this situation where he was the only guy in the last several years that's given them really what they need at the running back position. Once they franchise Orlando Brown and try and attack some of their other weaknesses, they're not going to have any money, right? And so as you're trying to fill in behind Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who's likely still to get at least one more chance to be the starter, and hopefully not a star, but emerging as an above average starter, they're still going to need that complement. And McKinnon is going to be inexpensive because teams are going to see, well, I mean, even with the Kansas City Chiefs, he wasn't really used until the very end of the season. There are some other teams that are like the Chiefs that could use him, but I think in most of those situations too, you're thinking, okay, well, round 14, I'm okay with that if somebody can peel him away from Kansas City. So that actually seems like a pretty safe and pretty high upside pick. Now, nobody is safe, obviously, in this round 14 range, but I don't think that he can get killed by free agency. And so I like that pick there. And then our next pick in round 15 is Ronald Jones. And Jones had a bad year. There's no way to really soften that up. When he did get some chances, he didn't really flash compared to, a Keyshawn Vaughn or, whoever else they have there. And yet he's still young. We saw what he did in 2020. We know that he has the speed. In the sort of fun article I did, plotting out a variety of different scenarios and looking at all 32 teams and guessing where I thought guys would go and fit and work really well, I think it would make sense for him to sign a prove-it deal with the Ravens. And I think it would make sense for the Ravens to let Gus Edwards go and go with Jones and J.K. Dobbins there. Jones would be the perfect fit for Baltimore, right? Because he doesn't have to catch the ball. They're not going to throw to the running backs. They open some holes, and then, he has the speed to take it the distance. So again, at those prices, I really like those picks. It's within the context of, nobody in round 14, 15 is a lock, but I was surprised that those guys were there in some ways. I'm glad we took the risk. I didn't necessarily think that they would come back around. Compare those players with some of the people going in that range, just to give people a feel. Melvin Gordon was the 1103. Chris Carson was the 1111. If he can come back from that neck injury and is in the mix to be the starter for the Seahawks, you'd have to love that value for him. Kenneth Gainwell in round 12, Myles Gaskins in round 13. The next picks after ours were Hines, which you could argue would have made sense to go with Jonathan Taylor, although we don't like really to do the handcuffs. Justin Jackson, J.D. McKissick, Deontay Foreman. Those guys sort of interesting too as veterans who could end up in good situations for 2022.
I think what's really interesting, Sean, when we look through some of the players that are going in that range is how, I guess we'll say, the mighty have fallen. I can see in round 13 we have Laviska Shenault in there. That one breaks my heart from last season's hype, from where we were expecting things to go with him. I think it's going to be interesting to see where some of these other guys, there's kind of free agency questions around a lot of these guys. Somebody like Kenny Galladay, who's with the Giants, really had a terrible season. It wasn't somebody we were really looking to have on rosters, but I don't know. It'd be the same this year, I think, but he's going in the 14th round. I think the running backs going in that range. You took Jared McKinnon. I think your argument there for him is very valid. The only other way I really see maybe if the Chiefs move away from that is to draft a replacement in the draft, and get somebody on a rookie contract. But McKinnon's probably going to end up on the veteran minimum, so it would make sense for him to keep him there. But we do have Sony Michel going in that range with Chuba Hubbard, but with Christian McCaffrey back, it really is going to take a significant impact to Hubbard's value. And Hubbard did get his opportunity this past year, and those flashes there, but it wasn't what we had hoped heading into the season. In that range, Sean, I think the picks that you've made, I think they're basically as well with us drafting at this point of the offseason, the upside of a lot of those guys, like a Ronald Jones as well, is so high that I think it makes sense to take those guys in there. There's players going in there like Kendrick Bourne, or probably at where Kendrick Bourne's ceiling is even with this particular season. So a lot of the guys going in here feel like this is where they should be going. Then we have somebody like Marvin Jones going in the late 15th round. So there is players who we may be able to find spots there, but like you said earlier, with Pete and what Pete has shared over the years and we've talked about, when you get into this spot, the wide receiver values are very, very limited. And then we're getting into situations where the running back values are standing out. And when I'm looking through this board and what players are remaining, it is the running backs that I would be looking to target in this range. Even somebody like Trey Sermon, who pretty much had a non-existent rookie season, is going in the 14th round. Like, I think there's some interesting values here where at the running back position it might not work out for you, but there's a lot of upside with those guys. Tight end as well, as we've talked about a lot, it dries up very, very quickly once you get into those double-digit rounds, especially once you go past, I think, round 11, you're getting into, there's not a lot of those guys after that point that are going to have big seasons. Somebody who's interested in that really late range that things could turn out if Rodgers ended up back in Green Bay. Robert Tonyan is going in the 17th round. Maybe somebody there. Brevin Jordan did have some flashes as a rookie. He's going in the 17th round. So there's some tight ends there, but I think you're starting to take shots that it's not going to work out on a very consistent basis there. The other players, Sean, that are in there is the quarterbacks. And you did, on Thursday, we talked through some of your tiers, but there's a lot of guys going in that range that would fit into it. You did take Ryan Tannehill in the 12th round, and we've touched on him a few times. But again, once we go past that 12th round, we talk about the quarterback windows when we're drafting in best ball. After we get out of that 12th round, there isn't a huge amount to excite you in those ranges. The one player that you mentioned that was interesting that didn't get drafted, and this one is Sam Howell, who you have in your tiers at number 27, but you mentioned 31 quarterbacks drafted in this, and he didn't go off the board. So with that in mind and getting Tannehill and getting your quarterback earlier in the draft as well, is that something that in hindsight or maybe in future drafts that you look to attack and hold off? The only problem with that is you're looking for a very specific scenario that may not play out the same way in another draft. So it is a case that pretty much we're going to be doing very similar to what we did in previous years. And those later round picks are going to be a lot more running backs based on having taken those wide receivers early and to try and get those quarterbacks in the quarterback window. So that window is a little bit tighter, it feels like, this year if you're going true late round quarterback.
Yeah, and the late round quarterback, any given year, something that hasn't worked could work because it relies very specifically on individual players and the types of seasons that they have. But one of the things that has been interesting is the late round QB has not been effective in best ball. And when I think of late round QB, I'm more or less talking about an extreme version of it, not necessarily the original version of it that JJ articulated, but really waiting for these late guys. One of the things that we have seen is that, and again, it depends on your format and the number of rounds that you have, whether 2 QB or 3 QB is the way to attack these different best ball leagues. But even in the leagues where 2 QB is the way to play it, the thing that we find is that 3 QB will work, but it still mostly works when you take all 3 of those quarterbacks in the window. It's not something where it works because you're getting this great value late. And so I think that after you get past Ryan Tannehill, maybe there's an interesting argument for Daniel Jones if he could get healthy, and then the new coaching staff there makes him sort of a destitute person's version of Josh Allen. Maybe Mac Jones takes the next step. Obviously, he's losing his offensive coordinator. There are questions about if they really have the pieces or the desire to upgrade his weapons after, they made a big push in that category last offseason and got a little bit of production from those guys that they brought in, but definitely not anything that is franchise changing. I would still like to think there's a slight chance that Zach Wilson takes a big step in year 2. And we do see the quarterbacks take a big step in year 2. So some of the expectations that we've had for these rookies, after seeing what Justin Herbert did, maybe that's the wrong way to think about it. And, you're getting actually a discount on Jones and Wilson, but it's probably more something that if you're going to wait, go ahead and wait longer. Because once you've missed the window, there's no need to reach, right? You're going to get good value to other positions. Take someone like a Jimmy Garoppolo late, assuming that they move him to a team that is at least decent, and he's going to get you some points. But unless he gets moved into a fantastic situation, stays healthy, takes the next step forward and is in a more attacking scenario. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo is not going to be someone who, even at a good price, really does a lot for you, especially when you're talking about winning tournaments. And so, we just keep going back to it. You've got to get those guys in that window. Call them a little bit more what we did here at running back. It comes back in round 16. Darrell Henderson goes in the interim. He doesn't come back to us. So we take a couple of rookies. We go with Rashad White and Brian Robinson Jr. We were also debating Tyler Algier, who probably is the guy who has the best chance to emerge as, sort of a 2-down plus starter. All three of these guys have size, especially Robinson and Algier. All three of them have pass catching ability, especially White and Robinson. And they have the potential to fall into at least a committee type of role, which then, we know once someone is in a committee, then you are an injury away from getting the kind of workload that every once in a while will be very valuable in fantasy. And so we kind of wanted the size, production, receiving profiles here to where these guys are going to be considered for some important touches, some high value touches, even if they're in a committee. Now, these guys could fall completely out of drafts if their landing spots are worse than we're hoping, or if their reality draft position ends up being very, very bad. They fall to this point because none of these guys necessarily profile as stars. They have some pretty serious warts on their resumes as well. And yet, with this class not having a ton of depth, it's also tricky to see scenarios where guys who do have this sort of size, receiving profile, size, decent athleticism profile are going to, fall all the way to round 6 or 7. So you probably have a little bit of floor baked in. But part of it too is that we needed all three players in order to have a realistic chance of one of them coming through.
Yeah, and I think overall, again, I'm looking forward to getting into these drafts. I have the itch. I mentioned when the season ends that it doesn't be long coming back around again to get back into drafting some teams, and drafting is, I think, my favorite part of fantasy football in general. So looking forward to getting into some more of these over the next couple of weeks. Shawn, we're going to finish up with a recommendation. I don't know, I might put you on the spot for one today, but I went with something that's a little bit out there. I'm guessing Shawn hasn't sat down to watch this one himself. It's one that I mentioned, I think, a couple of weeks ago. Something that I like to do now with our daughter is a movie night. And now the problem is like she wants movie nights on like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. The reason is that she gets to have some candy and some sweets when that does arrive. So we did last Saturday sit down, we watched Sing 2. Some of the parents out there probably know what I'm talking about with Sing 1, but I enjoyed this one. Cartoon film, like most cartoon films, there's animals who, of course, this one's a musical, but the big shout out to this one is I'm a big U2 fan, and Bono is actually voicing one of the characters in this. There's some U2 music in it, so if you're a U2 fan out there, this might be a kids movie that is for you, as they play a couple of U2's kind of greatest hits throughout it. So that is Sing 2. Check that one out. Hopefully some people will enjoy it. But Shawn, maybe you'll give the growing ups out there a suggestion as well this week. We're trying to appeal to the younger demographic. I don't know if we're trying to appeal to the kids watching Sing 2.
Well, there are a lot of people who are looking for good content for the whole family, for the children, so that will probably work in nicely there, Colm. I don't have little ones, so I have not been watching Sing. But I did get a chance to check out For All Mankind. As many listeners know, we're kind of going through the different streaming services, trying to find some good content.
You're going to be able to, Shawn, recommend the best streaming service. That's what we'll start doing.
They are pretty well balanced, I would say, and you kind of get the amount of content that you are paying for. It's been fun to see Netflix actually coming out with some content that you wouldn't expect to find on CBS or ABC. I don't know why you would subscribe to Netflix, because CBS and ABC are free if you want to watch formula police dramas or reality shows. But Netflix doing a little bit better as of late. Obviously, we had the break because a lot of filming couldn't be done there for reasons that unfortunately we're all too familiar with. But also with the pandemic, many of us have dried up our well, so to speak, in terms of the queue and the shows that we're looking for. So have been exploring the different streaming services. Do have the Apple Plus right now. Obviously, Ted Lasso on there is fantastic, but you go beyond that. And one of the shows that has gotten fantastic reviews and is pretty interesting is For All Mankind, which is an alternate history version of the space race between the US and the USSR, a scenario in which the Soviet Union actually gets to the moon first and then sort of spurs more of a real race and more of a development of the space programs in both countries than what we saw. Now, that's not to say that we didn't have a several decade push by NASA. Everyone is familiar with the shuttle programs and that kind of thing, but it's a much bigger deal and more built out and more of a race. There's more drama with how everything plays out in the show For All Mankind. Very well done. Its creator, Ronald D. Moore, is someone who did a lot of work with Star Trek over the years. For those of us who loved the Battlestar Galactica reboot, and I would say loved the first half of it. Obviously, the second sort of portion of that went down the drain. But someone who also has worked on Outlander. Now, Outlander is a show that I was a little disappointed with, and so that part of it doesn't appeal to me as much. But this is obviously a very talented person in charge. But then we also have a fantastic cast with Joel Kinnaman, who has been involved in all kinds of cool things, and we always still refer to him as Holder from The Killing, but did a nice job in the show Hannah as well, which is on Amazon Prime. But then the real star, Michael Dorman, who was the lead character in what I'm starting to consider, Colm, a true contender the more that I sort of compare and think about the show's Patriot. For anybody who hasn't watched Patriot, you got to go back and watch that. It's probably the only show that's remotely competitive with Deadwood as the best show of all time. The sad thing in this is that our superstar, our lead character from Patriot, he is an astronaut. He does play a little bit more of a womanizer, drinker, what have you. So not necessarily the lead that you're looking for. It doesn't have the same flair from his character in Patriot, who is one of the coolest characters in movie, or I should say television history. But a fantastic cast, lots of great female astronauts in the show as well. And just getting ready to start into season 2, where we jump forward into the Reagan era. There are some different presidents in this. It is an alternate history, but Ronald Reagan, not surprisingly, so dominant in terms of the presidential politics at the time. He does still win election, and then we're into the 80s, right? So if you have interest in some of the things happening late 60s, 70s, now into the 80s, there's that flair as well. I know there are a number of shows that have been very popular in the last 5 to 10 years because they do focus on some of these time periods that people are either nostalgic for or didn't live through and are interested in and want to find out some things about. And so many great things, but an alternate history space race, you can't beat that.
Yeah, and I think I haven't checked that out. I think I will. My question to Shawn, usually after we finish recording these ones, is, is that suitable to watch if there's a child in the room? And this one looks like it might be one that fits that bill. They're always the difficult part. Anything I see pop up on Netflix, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to watch that. And then you're like 3 minutes into the episode and you're like, yeah, this isn't gonna work. So yeah, hopefully I'll check that one out. But yeah, listeners, we had a lot of fun last year when we got recommendations from you guys in terms of some of the stuff you were suggesting, from books to films to TV shows. So send them our way as well. We'll talk through some of the better ones, or not the better ones, but the ones that we're going to try and catch up on ourselves on the show. As always, finishing up the show, you can get yourself a 10% discount to RotoViz NFL Pass. All you have to do is use the code RBRadio2021 at checkout, or go to rotoviz.com/podcast for more information. Highly, highly recommend. If you haven't signed up, take the leap. Sign up. It's well worth it. You'll get all the value for money that you can imagine with that subscription, access to all of the content and tools, and of course as well access to all of those articles coming from Sean Siegele, Blair Anders, Curtis Patrick, and all the team on RotoViz.com. So check that out. Make sure you subscribe on all your favorite podcast platforms to the various RotoViz podcasts. Check out the shows up on YouTube as well. That's going to do us for this week. We have 3 shows: Tuesday, Thursday, and today on Saturday. If you haven't had a chance to check out some of the other ones, head back and check it out. Did you enjoy that clip? Make sure you hit that subscribe button to get more content from RotoViz. And of course, you can check out full-length podcasts at rotoviz.com/podcast. Available on all podcast platforms. Check out our wide range of content. Once again, rotoviz.com/podcast.